The archivist sits behind a massive oak desk in the semi-darkness of a vast classical archive. His short silver-gray hair catches the faint green light of a single banker's lamp. He slowly looks up into the camera with a cold, calm expression. The year was 1814 in industrial Manchester. A wealthy manufacturer launched a revolutionary line of decorative products. They featured an unprecedented emerald green pigment. What nobody knew at the time was that these sheets were silent executioners. This beautiful decor transformed cozy rooms into airtight gas chambers. It rewrote sanitary laws and wiped out entire lineages. This mundane luxury was printed rolls of interior wallpaper. This is a story about corporate control and the terrifying price of global economics. To comprehend the true scale of this disaster, we must peer into the domestic life of the past. Before the advent of affordable wallpaper, the interior of a human home was a grim place. For centuries, residential architecture remained fundamentally flawed. Cold stone walls absorbed relentless moisture from the damp earth. The interiors of urban dwellings were perpetually dark, cold, and profoundly depressing. Heavy rain seeped through porous brickwork. The internal surfaces developed a thick, white crust of saltpetre. Black mold spread like a cancer across every living space. The poor lived in a state of eternal twilight. They lacked the means to cover these rotting surfaces. The wealthy class attempted to mask the decay with expensive solutions. They hung massive, heavy wool tapestries along their grand hallways. And no, I'm not making that up. These elaborate textiles hung against stone for generations. They were never washed. They could not be cleaned with standard methods. Over decades, these tapestries transformed into colossal biological hazards. They became massive dust traps. They crawled with millions of clothes moths, biting lice, and parasitic mites. The fibers locked in the dried sputum of tuberculosis patients. Every time a servant brushed past the fabric, a cloud of pathogens filled the room. The stagnant air inside these chambers caused chronic respiratory failure. Wealthy aristocrats suffered from permanent wheezing and unexplained lung infections. Humanity was trapped inside its own shelters. People desperately craved an escape from this ancient filth. They needed a cheap, light material to cover the hideous reality of their walls. They wanted something bright to simulate the natural world outside. The psychological toll of these dark interiors was immense. Winter turned homes into literal tombs of despair. The smoke from open hearths coated the ceilings in thick, oily soot. Walls turned a dull, uniform shade of greasy gray. Candles offered little relief. They emitted foul-smelling fumes from animal tallow. Scrubbing the stone walls was a futile exercise. The dampness returned within hours. The human spirit withered under these conditions. Melancholy was considered a standard condition of domestic life. Medical treatises of the era frequently blamed the home environment for failing health. Doctors noted that patients withered away when confined to their rooms. The lack of light combined with toxic mold created a biological trap. Society was ripe for a decorative revolution. People wanted color. They craved life. They were willing to embrace any innovation that promised to banish the eternal gloom. This desire created a massive market vacuum. Early wallpapers existed, but they were a luxury for the ultra-rich. Artisans painted them by hand. They imported expensive sheets from China. The average citizen could only dream of such cleanliness. They resorted to cheap whitewash made from lime and chalk. This material flaked off constantly. It created a fine, chalky dust that irritated the eyes and throat. The cycle of domestic misery seemed unbreakable. Then, the industrial era arrived with promises of cheap luxury. Mechanization threatened to democratize beauty. The stage was set for a brilliant new product. Promised to bring nature indoors. Promised to wash the world in eternal spring. Instead, it brought an invisible killer into the heart of the family. The turning point arrived in the year 1775. A brilliant Swedish chemist named Carl Wilhelm Scheele made a monumental discovery. He mixed copper sulfate with sodium carbonate and arsenious oxide. The chemical reaction produced an extraordinary precipitate. It was a crystalline powder of incredible brilliance. The world had never seen such a vibrant shade of green. It was deep, lustrous, and completely stable. Existing green pigments were dull and faded rapidly under sunlight. Scheele had unlocked the secret to eternal emerald. He called his creation mineral green. Later, the public would know it simply as Scheele's green. It was beautiful. It was cheap to produce. It was also fundamentally lethal. The great chemist did not realize the true nature of his creation. Scheele was an isolated, tragic figure in the history of science. He possessed an extraordinary mind but lacked financial resources. He spent his entire life working in primitive pharmacy laboratories. He lacked proper ventilation. He had no protective equipment. Scheele discovered oxygen, molybdenum, and chlorine, yet he rarely received the credit or the wealth he deserved. He lived in a state of deep isolation. He worked long hours in the freezing cold. He routinely tasted and inhaled the chemicals he isolated. His body slowly accumulated a cocktail of heavy metals and toxins. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything. Scheele's hands were permanently stained with toxic green paste. He suffered from agonizing joint pain. His skin developed painful, ulcerated sores. He experienced severe kidney failure before his prime. In 1786, at the young age of 37, Carl Wilhelm Scheele died. He was found dead in his laboratory surrounded by his toxic discoveries. He passed away in total poverty. He left behind a legacy of brilliant science and a deadly formula. He never witnessed the global madness his green pigment would unleash. The commercial world did not mourn the tragic chemist. Capitalists immediately seized his formula for free. There were no international patent laws to protect his estate. Wallpaper manufacturers recognized the immense profit potential of this vibrant shade. They realized they could produce this dazzling green for mere pennies. The timing was absolutely perfect. The Industrial Revolution was hitting its peak. Steam-powered printing presses were replacing traditional woodblock artisans. Factories could now produce miles of pattern paper in a single day. The cost of interior decoration plummeted. Suddenly, the rising middle class could afford to look like royalty. The marketing of the era was aggressive and relentless. Bright green became the ultimate symbol of sophistication. It represented fresh growth, nature, and high society. It became a cultural obsession. Manufacturers plastered the color onto every available surface. It was used in clothing, artificial flowers, toys, and confectionery. But its primary home was wallpaper. Families rushed to strip their old, damp walls. They replaced the ancient soot with beautiful, leafy patterns. They covered their bedrooms, parlors, and nurseries in Scheele's green. The drab, gray world of the past was gone. A new era of bright, clean interior design had arrived. The public felt a deep sense of progress. They believed they had conquered the domestic gloom of their ancestors. The transformation of the European home was breathtakingly rapid. By the 1830s, the emerald trend had become a global pandemic of style. London, Paris, and Berlin were completely intoxicated by the shade. Printworks operated day and night to satisfy the insatiable demand. The visual landscape of the Victorian home changed entirely. Intricate patterns of ivy, ferns, and exotic palms covered every wall. The rich green surface reflected the gaslight beautifully. It created an atmosphere of opulence and warmth. It was a visual triumph over the industrial grime outside. The home had become a sanctuary. It was an artificial Eden built inside the crowded, polluted cities. But this Eden rested on a foundation of pure poison. The manufacturing process was a horrific nightmare for the factory workers. Young children and desperate women mixed the raw arsenic powder into the dyes. They worked in thick clouds of green dust. They did not wear masks. Their hair turned a bizarre, unnatural green. Their lungs filled with the toxic mineral. Their skin peeled away in bloody sheets. They suffered from agonizing ulcers in their armpits and groins. Many collapsed on the factory floor and died in convulsions. The owners replaced them immediately. Labor was cheap. The profits were historic. The human cost of production was hidden behind the high walls of the industrial slums. Think about that for a second. This trendy wallpaper contained massive amounts of pure arsenic. A single square foot held enough poison to kill several adults. A standard family parlor required hundreds of square feet of paper. The walls were literally sweating death. Yet, the consumer remained completely oblivious. They admired the beautiful patterns while sitting in their comfortable armchairs. They invited friends over for tea in their elegant green rooms. They put their infants to sleep in cradles pushed against the vibrant green walls. The home had become a beautifully decorated mausoleum. The trap was set. The trigger was about to be pulled by the most ordinary force of nature. The trigger was simple atmospheric moisture. The very dampness that wallpaper was meant to hide became the catalyst for slaughter. Victorian homes lacked proper modern insulation. The walls remained cold and prone to condensation. When the moisture seeped into the wallpaper, it soaked the starch paste used for gluing. This environment became the perfect breeding ground for common household fungi. Specifically, a microscopic organism named Scopulariopsis brevicalis began to flourish. This fungus fed on the starch paste. To survive, it broke down the copper arsenite pigment within the paper. It metabolized the heavy metal. The biological process produced a byproduct. It released an invisible, odorless gas called trimethylarsine. This gas was a devastating neurotoxin. It was completely undetectable by the human senses. It drifted silently from the walls into the room. It mixed with the stagnant indoor air. It filled the lungs of the sleeping inhabitants. The nightmare began with subtle, confusing symptoms. People woke up with severe headaches. They experienced a strange, persistent burning sensation in their throats. Their eyes became bloodshot and highly sensitive to light. Doctors were completely baffled. They diagnosed these ailments as common colds, influenza, or general exhaustion. They recommended that patients spend more time resting at home. They told them to stay in their beautifully decorated bedrooms. This medical advice was a literal death sentence. The illness progressed with horrific regularity. The toxic gas slowly destroyed the internal organs of its victims. It attacked the nervous system. It caused chronic vomiting, severe abdominal cramps, and bloody diarrhea. The victims grew weaker by the day. Their skin took on a sickly, waxy yellow hue. Hair fell out in large clumps. In severe cases, the skin developed painful eruptions that mirrored the ulcers of the factory workers. The most vulnerable members of the household suffered the most. Infants and young children succumbed rapidly. They spent hours playing on the carpets next to the walls. They breathed the concentrated gas near the floor. They even scratched the beautiful paper and licked the sweet-tasting dust. Thousands of children died in their nurseries. Their deaths were attributed to gastric fever or sudden infant death syndrome. The tragedy was not confined to a single neighborhood. It struck the wealthy and the poor alike. The obsession with the color green crossed all class boundaries. No one suspected the beautiful decor. When an entire family fell ill, they assumed it was a localized outbreak of cholera or typhoid. They never looked at the walls. They never questioned the elegant patterns that brought them so much pride. The silence of the killer was its greatest strength. It operated in plain sight. It was celebrated as a triumph of modern chemistry. It was sustained by an economic system that valued visual appeal over human life. The archivist sits behind his massive desk. He leans forward into the green-shaded light. His cold expression hardens as he looks directly into the lens. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything. The corporate elite knew exactly what they sold. They chose profit over human life. If this dark revelation opens your eyes, hit the subscribe button right now. Join our archive to uncover more hidden truths. The corporate denial was swift, aggressive, and highly organized. As rumors began to circulate among radical physicians, the wallpaper manufacturers mobilized their massive resources. They hired their own compliance scientists to conduct flawed studies. They published biased articles in popular design magazines. They assured the public that arsenic was completely harmless unless an individual literally ate the wallpaper. They weaponized the concept of personal responsibility. They blamed the victims for having poor ventilation or dirty habits. They claimed that true British manufacturing was the pinnacle of safety and progress. Any criticism was labeled as unpatriotic or hysterical. Think about that for a second. Industrialists knowingly protected a deadly product for profit. They formed a powerful corporate lobby. They pressured medical journals to suppress independent toxicological reports. Doctors who spoke out were publicly ridiculed. They were accused of destroying a vital national industry. The wallpaper barons understood the power of consumer psychology. They knew that human beings are deeply reluctant to abandon a status symbol. Shame was a powerful tool. If a family fell ill, it was framed as a personal failure of hygiene. The green craze continued to rage across the continent. The factory wheels kept turning. The gold continued to pile up in corporate bank vaults. One of the most ironic figures in this capitalist tragedy was William Morris. He was a famous designer, artist, and passionate socialist. He publicly advocated for the rights of the working class. He despised the ugliness of industrial capitalism. Yet, his own luxury design firm produced some of the most popular green wallpapers in England. His beautiful patterns, like the famous daisy design, relied heavily on arsenic-laden pigments. When doctors wrote letters to Morris warning him about the danger, his response was shocking. He dismissed their concerns with biting sarcasm. He claimed that the doctors were merely suffering from a fashionable delusion. He refused to change his formulas for years. Even the most progressive minds of the era were blinded by aesthetic vanity and commercial interest. What drove this willful blindness was a deeper financial reality. William Morris was not just a designer. He was also a major shareholder in the Devon Great Consols mine. This mining operation was the largest producer of arsenic in the entire world. The byproduct of copper mining was being converted directly into wallpaper dye. Morris was profiting at both ends of the supply chain. He collected dividends from the toxic raw material. He then collected profits from the finished decorative sheets. His socialist ideals vanished when confronted with the immense revenue generated by the emerald trend. This glaring hypocrisy demonstrates how deeply the poison had penetrated the economic structure of society. The turning point required a scandal at the very apex of global power. In the late 1850s, a visiting dignitary fell violently ill while staying at Buckingham Palace. The guest was occupying a luxurious suite decorated in a brilliant emerald green. Queen Victoria was deeply alarmed by the sudden, mysterious illness of her guest. She ordered an immediate investigation into the palace environment. A royal physician tested the elegant wallpaper in the room. The results were terrifying. The paper was heavily saturated with Scheele's green. The queen was horrified to discover that her own residence was a gilded death trap. She ordered the immediate removal of every green wallpaper in the palace. Laborers tore down the beautiful sheets under strict medical supervision. The royal panic sent shockwaves through high society. The story leaked to the press. It shattered the illusion of safety instantly. What the corporate lobby had denied for decades was now undeniable. If the Queen of the British Empire was not safe in her own bed, no one was. The market for green wallpaper collapsed almost overnight. Wealthy citizens panicked. They hired contractors to strip the green paper from their homes. This panic created a new crisis. The process of removing the wallpaper released clouds of dry, toxic arsenic dust into the air. The laborers who stripped the walls fell ill in massive numbers. The poison claimed its final victims during its eradication. The macroeconomic consequences of this shift were profound. The sudden collapse of the arsenic pigment industry forced chemical factories to pivot. They began to develop synthetic aniline dyes. This technological shift laid the groundwork for the modern pharmaceutical industry. The lessons learned from the wallpaper crisis birthed the first modern consumer protection laws. Governments realized that free markets would not naturally regulate safety. They established independent sanitary boards. They created legal limits for heavy metals in consumer goods. The definition of the home changed forever. It was no longer just a display of wealth. It had to be a regulated, safe environment. The legacy of this historical conspiracy still shapes our world. The architectural design of the modern world reflects the trauma of the Victorian era. The shift toward minimalist interiors, white walls, and easily washable surfaces was a direct reaction to the hidden terrors of Victorian clutter. We abandoned heavy fabrics and toxic pigments. We embraced a clean, clinical aesthetic. But the underlying mechanics of capitalist exploitation did not disappear. It merely shifted its geographic focus. The production of dangerous chemicals was outsourced to developing nations. The global trade networks of 2026 still carry products manufactured under hazardous conditions. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything. Modern manufacturing still relies on toxic shortcuts. Fast fashion brands use hazardous dyes that pollute waterways in distant countries. Electronics factories expose low-wage workers to heavy metals. The consumers in wealthy nations enjoy cheap, beautiful goods. They remain detached from the human suffering required to create them. The marketing strategies have evolved. They use terms like green and eco-friendly to manipulate public perception. The weaponization of consumer desire remains completely unchanged. We are still willing to overlook the hidden costs of our lifestyle choices. The story of the poisonous wallpaper is not a bizarre anomaly of the past. It is a perfect blueprint of how corporations handle systemic risk. When a profitable product is revealed to be dangerous, the corporate response follows a predictable script. First comes denial, then comes the suppression of science. This is followed by blaming the consumer. Only when the elite are personally threatened does real structural change occur. The historical record shows that humanity has a tragic tendency to repeat these cycles. We invite unknown hazards into our lives for the sake of convenience and status. Think about that for a second. Modern indoor air is filled with synthetic chemical outgassing. Flame retardants in our sofas, plasticizers in our flooring, and volatile organic compounds in our paint are standard. We live in an artificial chemical soup. We assume that modern regulations protect us perfectly, but history suggests that we are merely living in an updated version of the Victorian parlor. The true impact of our current material culture will only be fully understood by future historians. They will look back at our choices with the same shock and disbelief that we feel toward the victims of Scheele's green. The tragedy of the green wallpaper reminds us that beauty can be a lethal illusion. The human desire to master nature and bring it indoors is deeply rooted. But nature cannot be easily simulated with toxic chemistry. The vibrant green on the wall was a false promise of life. It was a mask for an industrial monster. The victims died for a trend. They sacrificed their children for a fashionable shade of paint. They trusted the market to provide safety. That trust was betrayed on a global scale. The gold accumulated by the factory owners has long since vanished. The suffering of the workers and consumers remains etched into the historical record. Let us examine the final days of the Green Panic. By the late 19th century, arsenic-free wallpapers became a major selling point. Companies proudly advertised their products as non-poisonous. The public slowly returned to decorating their walls. But the psychological scar remained. For generations, people viewed bright green interiors with deep suspicion. The color became associated with sickness, envy, and poison in literature and folklore. The physical walls of our homes are not neutral structures. They are political spaces. They reflect the economic realities of their era. They are boundaries where corporate interests meet the intimate reality of human flesh. The struggle for body ownership is fought in the most mundane arenas. It is fought in the choices we make for our living rooms. It is fought in the regulations we demand from our governments. The story of Scheele's green is a stark warning. It teaches us to look beneath the surface of our material world. It urges us to question the origin of our comforts. The beautiful surfaces of our lives often conceal a dark and costly history. We must remain vigilant. We must remember that the most dangerous killers are often the ones we choose ourselves. They are the ones we invite into our homes. They are the ones we pay for with our own hard-earned money. The historical record contains harrowing diaries from this era of medical confusion. Consider the notes of Dr. Thomas Hawksley from London. In the winter of 1862, He treated a wealthy family whose 4 children were mysteriously dying. They suffered from constant nausea and deep neurological tremors. The parents had spared no expense on their care. They kept the children confined to a beautiful room covered in emerald green paper. Hawksley noticed a fine green dust coating the tops of the books. He collected a sample and performed a primitive chemical analysis. He discovered pure copper arsenite. He ordered the family to leave the house immediately. Within weeks of leaving the green room, the children made a full recovery. Their agonizing illness disappeared. Think about that for a second. Great parental care became a cruel instrument of torture. Parents locked their sick children inside the rooms that were actively poisoning them. The medical community was slow to connect these individual tragedies. The division of scientific knowledge prevented a rapid solution. Chemists worked in laboratories while physicians worked in hospitals. They rarely communicated effectively. This intellectual separation allowed the corporate interests to exploit the gaps in public knowledge. They maintained that the dust was too heavy to be inhaled. They ignored the emerging science of microbiology. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything. Continental nations acted faster than Great Britain. As early as 1839, the German chemist Leopold Gmelin published a brilliant warning. He discovered that dampness caused a distinct garlic odor in green-walled rooms. He correctly hypothesized that this smell indicated a volatile arsenic gas. The Prussian government listened to its scientists. They banned the use of arsenic in wallpaper manufacturing shortly after. France and Germany quickly implemented strict safety standards. Yet, the British Empire refused to regulate the industry. They prioritized free market capitalism over the health of their citizens. The British Parliament debated the issue multiple times during the mid-Victorian era. The debates were fierce and highly political. Representatives of the manufacturing towns argued that regulation would destroy jobs. They claimed that the working class would suffer from economic ruin if the factories closed. They used the classic arguments of economic blackmail to stall legislation. They insisted that the scientific evidence was inconclusive. They demanded more studies and longer investigations. Meanwhile, the death toll continued to rise in British homes. The political system proved completely incapable of confronting corporate power without a massive public scandal. The public scandal eventually erupted through the efforts of radical journalists. They published sensational exposés in popular newspapers. They printed lists of dead children alongside the names of the wallpaper brands. They called the manufacturers literal murderers. This aggressive public shaming campaign forced the hands of the retailers. Large department stores began to refuse orders of green wallpaper. They recognized that the brand damage was becoming unprofitable. The market forces that created the crisis eventually began to extinguish it. The transition to safe alternatives was driven by a desire to avoid financial ruin. The chemical reality of arsenic poisoning is exceptionally gruesome. The toxin interferes with cellular energy production. It binds to vital enzymes and stops the cells from breathing. The body literally suffocates at a microscopic level. The liver and kidneys become overwhelmed trying to filter the heavy metal. They swell and rupture under the immense strain. The nervous system misfires constantly. This creates a sensation of pins and needles in the extremities. It eventually leads to complete paralysis. The victims suffered a slow, conscious degradation of their bodily functions. It was an agonizing way to die. The legacy of Scheele's green also entered the world of high politics and historical mystery. Some historians believe that this toxic pigment played a role in the death of Napoleon Bonaparte. The exiled emperor died on the remote island of St. Helena in 1821. His autopsy revealed severe stomach cancer and symptoms consistent with arsenic poisoning. Decades later, scientists analyzed a fragment of the wallpaper from his drawing room. The paper featured a beautiful pattern of gold stars on a brilliant green background. The damp climate of St. Helena was perfect for fungal growth. What nobody knew at the time was that decor killed the famous emperor. His British captors did not need to poison his food. The walls of his prison were already doing the work for them. This historical theory highlights the universal nature of the hazard. It spared neither emperors nor peasants. The chemical laws of the universe operate without regard for human hierarchy. Copper arsenite reacted the same way in a palace as it did in a slum tenement. The capitalism of the era democratized the poison. It ensured that everyone could experience the fatal luxury of the emerald trend. The beautiful green sheets became a twisted form of equality. Everyone shared the same risk in their quest for domestic beauty. The erasure of Scheele's green from the market did not happen instantly. It was a slow, agonizing retreat over several decades. Manufacturers gradually substituted the arsenic with safer chemical alternatives. They developed chrome green and cobalt green. These new pigments lacked the exact brilliance of the original formula, but they did not emit lethal gases. The public slowly lost its fear of the color green. The memory of the wallpaper panic faded into obscurity. It became a forgotten footnote in the history of design. Today, the modern consumer walks through home improvement stores without a single worry. We select shades of green paint for our walls with complete confidence. We assume that the products on the shelves have been thoroughly tested for safety. We believe that our regulatory institutions protect us from industrial poison. But the basic structure of the market remains unchanged. The drive to reduce production costs is still a primary force in global economics. The pressure to prioritize visual appeal over long-term health remains immense. The lessons of the Victorian wallpaper conspiracy are more relevant than ever in our modern consumer landscape. The archivist slowly closes his massive folio and removes his glasses in the dim lamplight. Human systems change, but our fundamental flaws remain identical. We still sacrifice safety for cheap aesthetic trends. Subscribe if this hidden history surprised you. Click the video on your screen right now to dive deeper.